Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Welcome to everyone listening in to Advance. Today, we're going to have a very interesting lesson about the Great Barrier Reef, so stay tuned. We're always glad to have everyone listening in and also in the studio today. And you know, this lesson today is interesting to me because I like scuba diving, and you will be surprised, but I have two other scuba divers in the class with us. Lois, you like scuba diving.
Well, yeah, it's more my husband that does it, but I am right beside him with my snorkeling.
Okay.
So, yes, and we, as Doris knows, we go away a lot, even on liveaboards, to enjoy scuba diving and snorkeling.
Well, have you ever been to the Great Barrier Reef?
Well, I've been to Australia twice, but my husband, as our listeners know, is a pilot, and on one of his times away, he got to scuba dive at the very south end of the Great Barrier Reef.
Oh, how exciting. Well, you can tell us more about that. I'm sure you found out about it. And then we have Josh with us today. Joshua, you like scuba diving. You've been certified now, and you're an actual scuba diver. Isn't that great?
That's correct. And I am so happy to be certified and able to really enjoy one of these amazing wonders on our planet, which is the ocean, and to be down in it. It's very, very, very fascinating, and I'm very glad to be here talking about it today.
Well, there's many places in Asia that you can go. Now, you can go around in America. I'm from Seattle, but it's too cold to scuba dive there, and it's not the same. But when you go to Australia and the Philippines and Malaysia, there's so many places. Are you anxious to go there?
I am very anxious to go there. Actually, the Great Barrier Reef has been on my wish list, so I've always been very interested in this part of the world to go, and now I'm very excited to talk about it today.
That's good. So everybody now, open up your magazines to page 10. Now, it happens to be April 1st, which doesn't mean a lot to some people, but in Americans, we kind of smile when we say that. Why do we kind of laugh when we say April 1st?
Well, April 1st is what we call April Fools. So that's a day on the year where we like to surprise people with false stories or jokes and then say April Fools. It's just an April Fool's joke.
I wonder who started that anyway. Do you know?
I do not know.
We'll have to do the history of that sometime, but we call it April Fool's Day. So I might come in and I say to Josh, you're fired. And then he's, why? What did I do wrong? April Fools, you're not. You know, So it's I don't know if that's funny or not, but people do a lot of funny things like that.
People do a lot of funny
You're
things.
not fired, okay?
Or funny tricks. Sometimes they do funny tricks on April Fool's Day.
Right. But this is not a foolish article. This is a very serious article, isn't it?
It's a great article, yes.
And it says that the Great Barrier Reef is not dead. Now, what would happen if a reef were dead?
Well, if a reef were dead, it wouldn't bring any life to it. So when I'm thinking about life, I'm thinking it won't bring any fish to it. It won't bring any turtles to it. It won't bring sea life to it.
What about coral and all the things, the plants and everything?
Exactly. It's all dead.
That sounds really sad, doesn't it?
Yes, and it's not a nice color either when it's all dead.
No, it's bright greens and reds and corals, but when it's dead, it's kind of a sandy,
ashy color.
Yes. Terrible. But it's not dead. That's the good news, isn't it?
That is very good news.
And where is the Great Barrier Reef, Josh?
Well, it's located off the coast of Australia, and we actually have a nice little map here. Kind of gives you an idea that it's on the northeastern coast, but it covers a lot of area, and that's why they call it the Great Barrier Reef.
That's right. We're going to find out more about it if you don't know much about it, but it is a very famous place for people who like to look at the ocean and scuba dive, and it's a very interesting place.
Right. It really is, and it's a place where people who just really care about our oceans want to know more about it so they can be involved in protecting our oceans.
So the scientists have been examining it, and they said, well, it's in trouble, but don't give up. It's not gone yet. It's not dead. So let's just do the introductory paragraph to talk about the subject to get ready for it. Are you all ready?
Yes.
On page 10, the first column.
The Great Barrier Reef is not dead, but it is in trouble, yet scientists still offer hope. Perhaps you've heard that the epic 1,400-mile-long Great Barrier Reef in Australia has died. But, according to Kim Cobb, a professor in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, it's not too late for the Great Barrier Reef. Cobb spoke to the Los Angeles Times about the world's largest reef system and why there is reason for both concern and hope.
I love this photo here. It says a school of fish. Now, when we talk about fish, we don't say a group of fish. We say a school of fish. That means a group of fish, doesn't it? Yes, and what does it say about that, Lois, the picture?
It says that it hovers over staghorn coral on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia.
Okay.
A reporter declaring the reef dead is off the mark, scientists say. And when I see this picture, it reminds me how low I'll go when I'm snorkeling, because I have been so close to this stuff, gently have touched it, and not with my feet, with
you're
a
not
finger,
supposed to touch it.
just gently. And you know what? I am amazed what I see when I take a really good look.
Yes, and they call this staghorn coral because it looks like the horns of cattle, like a antelope or buffalo.
Right,
go.
the deer, that's right, a stag, exactly.
And it's beautiful.
Yes.
And you're going to see a lot of that when you start more scuba diving out here.
That's wonderful.
Yes, and it's quite interesting. And, of course, the fish love to go in and out and swim in and out of these places. And beautiful, beautiful yellow-colored fish that we see over here, they are hovering over it. They just swim all around the coral. They find little things to eat that hide in the coral, don't they?
They do.
But people say, well, this reef is dead. Now, if it's dead, they won't be there. So it's not dead. So don't think that it's dead. People say, don't go there, it's dead. No, it's not. What do you think?
Well, obviously, we're getting our information from professors, scientists, and we have one that, according to Kim Cobb, a professor in Earth and Atmospheric Scientists, it's not too late for the Great Barrier Reef.
So don't give up.
I would think she has the inside scoop.
That's true.
Right. She's a lady, I guess, right?
Yes, she is.
And she's a professor in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. So the atmosphere affects the water and the earth and everything, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. And they said this is the epic. What is an epic anyway, Josh?
Well, epic is a word that we use for anything that's really big or really great, or sometimes both, really big and really great. So that would be epic.
Memorable, right, right.
Exactly.
We sometimes say it about movies.
Yes.
You'll often hear that, especially if they are an action movie.
There you go.
Like Star Wars or
Yes.
something like that. They call them an epic, right? Well, notice here that it says how long that is. Now, most reefs are not that long. How long is that reef?
Well, this reef is an epic reef, and so it's very big and very long. But here it says it's about 1,400 miles. And then over in our little info map here that says it's roughly about 2,300 kilometers. So that is a really long reef.
So
that is unbelievable.
So you can't believe it. If you look at the map on the next page, it'll show you a little bit clearer about that. Can you imagine a reef that goes that far?
Wow.
No wonder people like to go there. If you say, I'm going to the Great Barrier Reef, you say, what part? The north, the south, the middle?
Right.
It's long.
As my husband has just scuba dived the very south end of it because he's been in Brisbane and then driven up there to go. And so it is like he was explaining to me, oh, Lois, you just get to see a little bit because it is, like you say, Doris, so long. It's epic proportion.
Right.
No wonder it's an epic. And that's true, right? And this lady, Kim Cobb, she told the Los Angeles Times newspaper about this. She to talk to them about this world's largest reef. And then she's saying, hey, there's a reason for us to be concerned. Yes, we have problems, but there's also what?
Reason for hope.
Wow, that's important. There's hope for the reef, so let's not give up on it. Should we find out more?
We should.
For sure.
There's some question and answers here, and so she gave us answers. And so let's go and find out more. Read question number 1 on page 10.
Question: is the Great Barrier Reef dead? Answer: no, it's not. We just had a massive bleaching event, but we know from past research that corals are able to recover from the brink of death. Coral is an animal that exists in symbiosis with photosynthetic algae. The algae provides food for the coral in exchange for a great home. But when the water gets too warm, the algae become chemically destructive to the coral. When that happens, the coral convulses and spits out algae to protect itself. That removes all the color, allowing you to see right through to the underlying skeleton. So you are not necessarily seeing dead coral, you are really just seeing clear coral without its algae.
Now, I thought that was a very good explanation there. A lot of people don't realize that coral is actually a living thing.
Yes, it is. And you're right, Doris. People don't realize that. They actually think it's more, if you don't have a lot of experience in the ocean, they all actually think it's more like just a rock.
It's a stone or something. Yeah. But, it said that it had a massive bleaching event. Now, bleaching, of course, if you have clothes that are blue and you bleach them, they'll be white, right?
Right. But here they mean what maybe our grandmothers used to say, oh, go hang those sheets out on the clothesline and the sun will bleach them.
Get them white.
I can remember both my mom and my grandmother saying that, and this is what's happening here with the coral.
Bleaching is becoming white. Tell us more about bleaching here.
Well, so in this particular instance, we're talking about the bleaching of coral, right? So that basically means the same type of thing where it loses its color. So this is a process that occurs when coral colonies then expel their algae, which they depend upon for their color. And then when that's gone, the only thing that's left is the skeleton, which is colorless or clear, and that's why we call it a bleaching event.
Good. And it says, they know that they can recover from this, but it is at the brink of death. And what does it mean when we're at the brink of something, Lois?
Well, that's a good vocabulary focus word, Doris, and thank you for drawing our attention to it. Brink means the point where a new or different situation is about to begin.
Right. So it's almost there. You're at the brink of something that's going to happen. And we don't want the corals to die. Remember, corals are animals, and we don't think about this. But we have some very technical words here that you study if you study botany and biology and all.
So the first word we have here is symbiosis. So symbiosis is all it does is really describes a type of relationship between two animals or two organisms, and the way that they relate to each other, in particular by feeding off each other. So in symbiosis, it means that both benefit each other, right?
Now, so something that you would like to read in your textbooks, I don't think you're going to be talking about it too much to your friends, but
Probably
I
not.
guess it's the algae working with the coral thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And what about the photosynthetic?
Well, photosynthesis is a process where plants create sugars or energy from light. So this is a very specific process that allows plants to create food. And the symbiosis here then is that the algae creates the food from the sunlight, which then feeds the animals of the coral, which also provides the structure and protection for the algae. So they both benefit.
So
Well,
they need
Josh,
each
we're
other.
glad you're here today. I'm glad you're explaining it. But it's interesting. Photosynthesis or photosynthetic, we actually do hear it quite often.
Yes, we hear that word more.
Especially if we're somebody like me who there's certain kinds of programs on TV I'm drawn to and want to watch. And they're out there, and there's actually at least one or two recent ones that are good about the Great Barrier Reef.
Yes,
very
there
nice.
are. You can watch them on National Geographic. and
Yes,
some of those.
yeah.
That's true. And it's true that the algae gets this and then the coral lives off of it. So it's pretty interesting. But when the water gets too warm, then the algae, they become chemically destructive to the coral. So the warmer water affects the algae then.
It does. And so what it does is instead of the algae producing food, it produces something that's toxic or poisonous. And then, of course, that's no good for the coral, and the coral has to get rid of the algae. And then it does this convulsing, which is to shake violently in order to get the algae off of it.
So when this coral convulses and it's getting ready to die and it spits out the algae to protect itself, then it gets all the colors gone. And then you're just kind of like a skeleton. That's pretty sad, isn't it?
It is. And it's pretty sad that our oceans lately have been warming up too much, too, because we don't actually want this to happen.
Right. And a lot of places, like even around Taiwan and Philippines and all, where the coral used to be so bright and orange is now bleaching out. And that's very sad.
It is very sad.
Right.
But there is hope, though, because now this is something that was good for me to remember, is that when you see coral that has been bleached, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's dead.
There is hope for it, but we
Yeah,
have to
I
figure
did not
out.
know that.
Right? It's a
I
very
didn't know
important
that
point.
either. That's good. Well, let's take the second and third questions here. We have two more.
Question. But bleaching is still bad, right? Answer. Bleaching events are worrisome because if the coral misses this key food source from the algae for too long, it will literally starve to death. But if the water temperature comes back down, it will welcome the algae back. The key is that the water temperature change has to be relatively quick. Question. How can you remain hopeful about the fate of the Great Barrier Reef and other reefs in the Pacific? Answer. I work on a research site in the Christmas Islands, which was much more devastated than the Great Barrier Reef. It was worse off than any reef in the world, with up to 85% mortality. But even in the face of that whole-scale destruction, we saw individual corals that were still alive, looking like nothing had happened. I know that out of the rubble will come a reef that may not look exactly like before, but may be better adapted for future temperature change.
So in this first question, then, we sort of answer this idea of whether or not bleaching is really bad, right? Because, as we discovered before, just because coral has been bleached doesn't necessarily mean that it's dead, but it still can be bad for the coral.
It's kind of a bad sign, though, that it's the thing starting that shouldn't, don't you think?
Exactly, right? And what it says here is that what it is a sign that the coral is no longer feeding off the algae. And of course, if something goes without food for too long, it's going to be very bad for it and can lead to death.
I love how it says here.
It's just like people, too,
Yeah.
you know. If we go without food too long, we become like a skeleton.
Exactly. I love what it says here. It will literally starve to death. So,
Right.
Right? When something literally does something, it means that it actually does that thing.
Oh,
right?
my goodness.
So sometimes we'll say things like, oh, I'm starving to death, when we mean that we're very hungry, but we're not actually going to die
Right.
from starvation. Right?
But if you don't eat, you will become a skeleton.
Exactly. And you will literally starve to death, right?
But if the water gets too warm, then it changes the algae. But if the temperature comes up again, gets back again, then what happens?
well, it says that the key is that the water temperature change has to be relatively quick. But our next question says, how can you remain hopeful about the fate of the Great Barrier Reef and other reefs in the Pacific?
Well, that's a good question. How can we? Lois?
Exactly, because right now we're over in Oceania, so we want to know about this part of the world. And the answer says, I work on a research site. This is Dr. Kim Cobb in the Christmas Islands, which was much more devastated than the Great Barrier Reef. And I just want to tell our listeners a little bit about the Christmas Islands. They can look them up either through the internet or in their own atlas. And they're actually closer to Malaysia and Indonesia than Australia. And if you want to go there, people can fly there from both Perth, Australia, and Singapore. So it's interesting where this actually is in the world. It's very, very, very small islands. And it says it was worse off than any reef in the world. So with up to 85% mortality.
Now,
So
what is mortality?
mortality means death.
Right.
So
my
really
goodness.
death, right? Not
Total death. We always, you know,
85%. Oh, my
and
goodness.
this is the Christmas Islands, and said, but it says, but even in the face of that whole scale destruction, we saw individual corals that were still alive, looking like nothing had happened.
But Lois, they might die too if 85% did it.
Exactly.
It's still scary. Isn't that scary?
Exactly.
Right. So it says that I know that out of the rubble will come a reef that might not look like before, but maybe they will be better adapted to the different temperature change. I'm not so sure about that, but we certainly hope so.
We certainly hope so, right? And then this is kind of an interesting image here out of the rubble that will come before. So rubble is a word that we use to describe sort of debris of something or the leftovers of something that has been destroyed, right? So if a building has been knocked down, all of the bricks and the construction materials left on the ground, we would call that the rubble from the building.
We often hear that word when there's an earthquake.
Right.
Look at all the rubble around.
Or when somebody's bombed a place.
Exactly.
And
Look at all the rubble. Yes.
But, we hope that won't happen. And, of course, maybe the ocean will figure out some way the algae can adapt to that temperature. I don't know. But it says here in this Great Barrier Reef thread, in this little sidebar here, that they are in Australia. They're trying to do something about it, and they said they're going to implement a 35-year conservation plan. So they're working on it. They shouldn't they?
Yeah, they want to strive for this, Doris. I agree with you. And if Australia leads the way here in Oceania, it will make difference to other countries.
It will.
Like, for instance, a country Michael and I recently visited, the Republic of Palau. It will make a difference there because, unfortunately, we saw a lot of dead coral.
You see it every place.
A lot
in the
of dead
Philippines,
coral
different
there.
places.
And we'd only been there 11 years previous. It was such a difference to 11 years earlier. Very sad.
Well, we hope that's going to happen here. Well, let's look again at this Great Barrier Reef. It says here that, in this little sidebar, that it's composed of at least 400 species of coral. 400 different kinds of coral. That's amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible. I would love to see all 400, actually.
I would, too.
Well, what are some of the threats? Would you read that there about the threats?
Now, this is very interesting because in the article, we were just talking about water becoming too warm and that causing the algae to be toxic, right? But here it's listing other threats besides just water temperature, including increasing land-based pollution, which is specifically the nitrate runoff from farmland. Now, nitrates are usually used in fertilizer, so it's like a byproduct of fertilization.
And that kills the algae.
That kills the algae. Nitrates can come from other sources, but that's one of the big processes that is a danger for the algae and for the coral.
So people can do something about that.
Exactly.
Maybe.
And then they have another thing here called algae bloom. Now, algae bloom I know as red tide. Right? So red tide is a condition where the water becomes warm enough in order for algae to just explode in its population. So there's always algae in the water. In healthy seawater, there's always algae. But then when the water becomes a certain temperature, the algae just produces and reproduces and reproduces. And then what it ends up doing is a lot of places it'll turn the water like an ugly brown color. But there's so much algae in the water that it kind of chokes out everything else. And you end up getting like a lot of dead fish on the side of the beach, which is really not so great.
So that's a problem, too.
It can be a problem as well. And
what about the overfishing? Does that have something to do with it?
Well, and then we have bleaching due to global warming, but then also overfishing and coastal developments, right? So overfishing, there are, besides just the algae, there are fish that live in symbiosis with the coral as well. So when you start disturbing the fish populations, that also has an effect.
Well, and then if they export coal and things like that, and they dredge into the ocean or the rivers, that dredging, which is digging up, that is bad. What does that do?
Well, that can be very dangerous because it can be toxic to the oceans, of course. And it's just, if it's the river will eventually flow into the ocean.
Right.
So what they'll do here a lot is that when they need to get bigger ships into an area, they'll end up excavating the ground underneath the rivers and the ocean in order to make more space, and it kills everything, and it puts a bunch of dirt that's not supposed to be in the water as well.
That's too bad, isn't it? So they're trying to protect these areas, and there's so many places that have coral, but we don't want to see the bleached coral because that's a very bad sign, isn't it?
It is.
Right, and we want life in our oceans. We're dependent on it.
And so let's remember that it's important for us to do what we can. We can't do a lot, but we can be aware of the situation and do something, can't we?
We certainly can, and it's good that our listeners, along with us, are getting educated about the Great Barrier Reef, that it's not dead.
There you are.
Right. And remember now that corals are actually little animals. You don't think about them that way. We think about coral jewelry and how this beautiful kind of orange color and things like that. But we don't think about that's an animal. There's a lot of little animals living in the ocean. Isn't that right?
A lot of little animals living in the ocean. And even though they're very small, they're still very important.
They're all very important to each other. They rely on each other, don't they?
And you will see them, but they're the closest to being microscopic I have ever seen because they are very tiny.
Small. Right, that's true. And it's better not to touch them when you're down there.
Right.
Lois said just
That's
very
right.
lightly, but just be careful.
That's right. And whatever you do, please, folks, don't put your feet on them and don't walk through corals. I've seen people walk through corals. Please don't do it.
No, don't walk at all. No. So that's been a very interesting update on the Great Barrier Reef, but I hope a lot of you do understand that there's so many interesting things in the ocean, not only on the earth, in the forests and the mountains, but under the water. It's another whole world, isn't it?
It's true. And it's a beautiful world, and it's a world that we also depend upon for food and for all sorts of other things.
That's right. So let's keep it alive and work together to keep this beautiful earth.
Exactly. Healthy ocean means healthy earth.
So thanks for being with us today, and thank you for coming, Josh and Lois. It's been a fun lesson. See you next time.
Bye-bye.